Hello, my name is Brant Hunt. My channel is Discerning What is True, and I'm going to be reading chapter 5 from this book that I'm reading from, as I've been doing for the last few days, The Egyptian Miracle. This is by Rene Schwaller, and the chapter's entitled is called Elementary Concepts of Numbers as Key to Knowledge. And I'll go ahead and begin reading here from the book. But I also want to share a piece here, also artwork at the bottom of the page before we even actually start, since it's actually on the beginning page here. This is figure 14, to dance for the ka and intone H, 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 I, to the beat of clapping hands. Habit is probably the greatest obstacle to perceiving truth. The force of habit is such when speaking or writing that we remain barely aware of the reasons and aims of our gesture. Every emanated being forms a whole that can be sufficient into itself, or at least so we have the right to expect. Yet with sexual division, this sufficiency unto itself no longer exists for the all in one. It becomes two, and the two parts of this whole are necessary to make a totality, that is, that does suffice unto itself, which offspring. This duality becomes a trinity. And as soon as the unity of the emanated being is divided into some way or other, a means of exchange or communication is needed. This can be tactical at first, but as soon as there is consciousness and hence intelligence that is primitive as it may be, the need is born for the transmission of feelings or of observation and later also of thought. Thus, touch, noise, sound, modulated sound, and finally sound articulated into words are the manifestations of the complexity of consciousness, and they are significant of the separation of a being into two and three parts of itself, whence the necessity for communication between these parts. So I'm going to, again, like I said, I shared this earlier, figure 14, to dance for the ka and to intone H, 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 I, to the beat of clapping hands. And at the beginning of the next page is figure 15, which I have not shared, which is inspired by the songs and dances. Seven men halt the planetary statue of the gnome towards the tomb. This is it here. Again, just sharing from this particular book. We're only probably about a third away through this particular book. Separation of being introduced into, okay, three parts of self. We got noise, sound, song, speech. These also reveal a cause and effect world to which we are so accustomed that the phenomenon no longer affects us. I'm thinking of something that just popped in my mind as a boy, being out in the woods and nature. Um, it was what we call something that was adventurous at first, and then we took it as a habit, so to speak. We no longer were accustomed to it, meaning that we tuned it out as a boy, as I remember. That is that you were in awe of those things at one time, which is why you were a child. Then what happened simply is you lost the ability to listen what's around you. And what transpired simply is that you became an adult, you see. You never you never did what I call you were not what I call nature's dance, you see. You lost that, you see. That just something popped in my head. Yet this phenomenon is formidable once we train our attention on it. Symbolically or hieroglyphic writings, that is, um, that later become ideogrammical and finally alphabetical is similar variable magic since it allows man to think and live a world unto himself and to transmit to a reader his thoughts, sensations, experiences, or will by means of simple signs without any other direct personal communication, without even the help of the spoken word. In writing, as in speech, we see an evolution, or more correctly, a transformation of means corresponding to the growing complexity of the causes and the aims of the transmission. This transformation of means does not at all signify a evolution towards perfection, for an evolution can equally well go towards a imperfection if it signals only a transformation in conformity with the time and ambivalence conditions. Had the means of transmission of consciousness remained pure, the spoken word would be a noise or a modulated and rhythmic sound without complex convocation of grammar and syntax, expressing everything by rhythm only. By the intensity and the sequence of sounds and their variations, the writing would be made of images, that is, representing objects, and conventional ideograms, that is, for abstract ideas. In arithmetic calculations, to the contrary, nothing is artificial. By the mere fact of being, any entity whatsoever manifests its number, quantity asserts itself. Every being is first of all itself. Hence one, and from its point of view is ascertains. Hence counts the other units. Thus, it can add the units up to a certain limit where its intelligence and quantitative stops. Depending on their species, animals can count up to a certain number. Man himself can check by infinity, which is no more than the limits of his intelligence of quantities. For an animal that can count up to 5, 6 is infinity. It is certain that we can count by millions, billions, and zillions, but this is only additional. In the transcription, we have to count the zeros and by the artifice of a comma, determine the name we give to this number. This is no longer counting by multiplying a basic number. In order to overcome this difficulty, the units beyond our understanding are replaced by new and simpler units. Thus, in astronomy, we speak of light years, in microbiology of Macellus, and so on. The ancients placed the borderline of infinity at the number of a million, or 10 to the sixth power. Numbers assert itself. It is not the result of man's will, not of his intelligence. Intelligence, on the other hand, is the faculty of numbering. The primitive unity of a being sexually splitting into two manifests the number two, and it is correct to say that sexuality is nothing but the manifestation of the number two. The intelligence of a oyster stops at the number one. It is a ego and nothing more. It doesn't know itself as male, as it is male without female. It doesn't know itself as female, as it is female without male, depending on the time of year. With offspring comes the intelligence of the number three, and depending on the normal maximum number of the litter, the intelligence of a greater number. The female is able to count her young up to a certain number. If she happens to have more, she loses them, forgets them. They go beyond her finite frame of reference. It is as if her supernumerarious offspring were lost in the infinity of the universe. Thus, with great precision, numbers measure our universe, and we speak of an infinity small and of infinity large, which means, in fact, on this side of our intelligence and beyond it. Number governs us, commands us. Number limits us and frames us. We seek to penetrate the secret life of nature through intelligence, meaning that by the limited faculty of enumeration, we want to know number. This is absurd. Intelligence will never penetrate the cause of life. Let us go a step further. We hear sound through the ear. We know by experience that there are sounds we do not as yet hear, and there are sounds that we no longer hear. Thus, we are aware that vibration exists akin to those which, within specific limits, are called sounds. They are inaudible sounds, and we no longer call them sounds. Our sensorial universe is limited by numbers, yet we know that there are numbers in the case of vibrations below our sensory perception and beyond. In that case, we are no longer counting and our intelligence ceases. A new faculty enters, which is the characteristic of man, that is intellect. And the ancients, today we called it reason. The word intellect is more exact, if only because the ear that hears within a limit of numbers also shows us with precision and directness the existence of sounds that are inaudible physically, but audible through this other sense, the intellect. It is usually defined as the faculty of coordinating concepts. The ancients said that intellect belongs to man alone, or it has been breached unto him as a divine soul. A specific conjunction is indeed needed in order for intellect to arise. The sensorial function, that is the mnemonic cerebellum function, hence the numbering faculty, the intelligence, no longer suffice. With inaudible sounds, we enter into a new domain where we hear sounds without our auditorial sense. We know that they exist, yet no sensory clue reveals them to us. We know by deduction we can produce a vibration that we no longer hear, and yet we know that sounds are involved because our intellect tells us that they must be sounds. If it is a physical and concrete absurdity to call sound what manifests is no longer sound for us. Yet it is not a logical absurdity. It is not an absurdity or the intellect. Thus, we speak of irrational numbers, among others, which is a physical absurdity. Our intellect tells us that this number is without end, while our intelligence demonstrates to us that this endlessness does not exist, that there is a finite at the edge of infinity. Intelligence situates everything in a finite world. Intellect shows us a incomprehensible infinity. In one case, as in the other, however, it is not false to say, quote, the intellect tells us that. It's indeed a inborn knowledge that existed outside of all experience as a priority knowledge that allows us to affirm certain things intelligence and the senses cannot reveal. This is the unsolvable conflict that makes Spinoza and others affirm a metaphysical philosophy that a thinker like Kant can always show to be a inanimate. Indeed, intellect can affirm truths that intelligence cannot confirm. Philosophy works for naught as long as it attempts to reach agreements between those two points of view. In other terms, numbering, that is, defines a limit, and by this fact poses a infinite. Number is beyond limits, and by this fact does not recognize infinity. Intelligence is the faculty of counting. Intellect is consciousness of number. The intelligence can construct a arithmetic and a mathematic mathematics in the ordinary sense of these words. Yet, as long as there is a desire to count, numbers remain unknown. Intellect alone outside of all intelligence allows us to approach number. Let us attempt an explanation of what may seem absurd. Number does not admit to any infinity, which means that intellect, the knowledge inborn through the divine spark, does not recognize infinity. In order to recognize something, we must be outside of that thing. The finite can recognize the infinite, but the universe cannot be limited to a particular. What is infinite cannot admit a duality of finite and infinite, because all finite is immanent in the infinite. Thus, strangely enough, number, which is the infinite, that is the universe, world, soul, is perfectly defined. As this is the basics, the foundation of the entire knowledge of number, it should be clearly understood. Number is not an enumeration, but an entity. In arithmetic, when we say 3 and figure it by the symbol 3, we mean 3 added up units. When we speak of the number 3, we signify a triangle, a triangular surface, or unless the 3 units grouped together in sequence as a line, they will arrange themselves into a triangle. When we say number is an entity that is individuality, in this case, we mean that it is a being comprising a ego, its quality, its measure as numerical number, which is a individual. Moreover, it has its function because it exists only in relationship. Finally, it has its form. To develop these ideas would require lengthy elaboration, but it is the nature of number that demands our attention here. The arithmetic cipher, whole or fractional, lays a claim to a magnitude, a fixed quantity. Number, as I have said, is a function. Thanks to geometry, we can understand this without entering into a metaphysical considerations. Let us first take the example of a circle, for the calculations of which the number pi is used. This number is called irrational, a result of the incommensurability and the typical cipher of the infinite. If the diameter is said to have a definite value, the circumference is incomprehensible. If, however, the circumference is absolutely defined, it is the diameter that will be incommensurable. The incommensurable pertains no more to the circumference than it does to the diameter, and it may pertain to either one. Circle and diameter are arbitrary magnitudes, and pi is their relationship. The relationship is a function. Pi is the function of the circle. It is the number of the circle. The number is neither large nor small, but we are unable to transcribe it. Intellect is an inborn knowledge that intelligence cannot understand. In geometry, values can be established only through relations. It matters little on what side the infinite arithmetic cipher is placed. It is the relation that defines the form, or better, it is the form that determines the relation, I should say. Number, moreover, is always a geometric form, and therefore a function or relation, and never a numerical. It is neither finite nor infinite, but universal. It must now be possible to communicate the feelings of what number is. It is a function. It is a form. It is an entity. If we wish to decompose this from this form, an analysis will always yield elements in relation, some finite, others infinite. It is the fall of intellect and numbers into the intellectual cipher. Fall here means to step from the universal concept to concrete intelligence, reducing the universe to a particular. The universal is neither great nor small, neither finite nor infinite. It includes no schism. The particular is in the image of the universe includes magnitudes and divisions. It can be analyzed because it is bound, framed, and limited. Number itself cannot be analyzed. It is an indivisible entity representing an abstract form and function. It becomes a relation when placed into concrete form. Numbers can be studied only on this basis and not by composing and decomposing them as numericals. In arithmetic, 1, 2, and 3, 4 are values compared of 1 times 1, or 2 times 1, or 3 times 1, or 4 times 1. But the number 1, 2, 3, and 4 are abstract points, or lines, triangles, or squares. They are androgynous or sexed, that is, procreators or progenitor. They are active or passive. They are natural elements, life or death. They are principles. They are not quantities, but the quantities of all there is in the world. Concerning unity approach to the study of numbers. Elementary explications concerning numbers lead one to infer a cosmic character for number and a special mentality, or is comprehensivism. How can contemplation of number shed light on cosmic laws? This can be done only be considering the necessities immanent in numbers. They can only be what they are. They can create between themselves only certain relations. Only certain invariable functions can spring from them. These are laws that ascend themselves to the intellect, so that no other arguments can prevail. For instance, a number multiplied by itself, repeated as many times as there are units composing it, constitutes a square. This is inedible. This is inedible and cannot be otherwise. There is a ineludibility here with which all reason must comply. It is evident to such a degree that no one would ever dream of contesting it. But upon reflection, isn't it strange that this should be ineludible? Are we not, in this case, faced with an absolute fact, this absolute which nature everywhere else refuses? There is no doubt about it. That is why number belongs to the eternal world, or Plato's Timaeus. Number is that non-created and immutable world. Thus, the science of number is the science of unity. It shows us intelligibly that all proceeds from unity and returns to it through diversity. This diversity is precisely our world created in the image of the eternal world example. We certainly cannot comprehend unity, but our intellect tells us that it must exist. It should be stressed that we must approach these questions through the particular mentality of the intellect, unless we resign ourselves to never penetrating this world, which is a cult for intelligence, contending ourselves with the mentality of our cerebral cortex and intelligence, and remain in a finite framework limited by an unknowable infinite. The mathematical definition of unity will make my point. A across A equals 1. This means that any magnitude, whatever, can be considerable as having a value of 1 because anything is divisible by itself only once. This is perfectly true, so true that by perfectly satisfying our intelligence, it tends to satisfy us altogether. But let us analyze this case, and we shall discover curious things, though a concrete and elementary example. An apple divided by itself is 1. This unity does not mean one apple, it simply means 1, just as a table divided by itself is also 1, and half an apple divided by itself is also 1. Algebraically expressed in what we call if A is over A equals 1, comma, if N over N is always equal to 1. Two terms are used here to define the concept of unity. This argument requires quantity. Thus, the concept of unity is not absolute, as any quantity whatever can be divided by equal in quantity. That is, 2 over 2 equals 1. 3 over 3 equals 1, and etc. as 1 over 1 equals 1. Yet 1 divided 1 does not exclude, but on the contrary imposes the fractions of this quantitative unity. Half over half equals 1. 100 over 100 equals 1, and so on. The comprehension of ciphers as numerating numbers of quantities has limits, as we have seen, and as we are obliged to write. Another example is infinity over infinity equals 1, which is logical and unavoidable. But here the intellect intervenes and tells us infinity has no limits, thus has no measurement and expressible quantity. So that infinite cannot be divided unless it is to be infinite divided. In either case, it is no longer 1, but indivisible. It is 0, or else infinity divisible. It is an infinite number. The formula for this is infinity over infinity equals 1. It is a logical reality and an absurdity for reason or intellect. This is how the definition of mathematical unity demonstrates the two mentalities, the two paths. Pushing the analysis to this point demonstrates the inanity of this definition as absolute unity. There's another demonstration of the absurdity of mathematical unity by a different argument. If 1 divided by 1 equals 1, and this unity be truly unity as demanded by our intellect, then it cannot be divisible. Actually, for example, 1 over 2 equals, that is 1, 1/2 equals 2, 1 and over 1 over 3 equals 3, etc. The quantum of the division grows as the divisor is reduced, as we have not ceased to be concerned with quantities. Every arithmetic unity is composed of an infinity of fractions. Thus, the arithmetic unity is not true unity, which would be intangible and eternal. It is only a quantitative unity, which leads to another absurdity for the intellect. In other words, 1 equals over infinity equals infinity. Only the world is in totality can be considered the divisible by infinity, and the result would be 1 and not infinity. For example, 1 over world equals infinity, or world over 1 equals infinity or world. Here, 1 equals world, hence world equals 1. It can be admitted that arithmetic unity, which is only 1 unit and absolute unity, when divided by infinity, which may be infinity small or infinity large, gives a result of infinite largeness or infinite smallness. In other words, if this infinite division means infinite large, a arbitrary unit being limited can no longer be divided, as it would be infinity small in relation to this infinity large quantity. Therefore, this mathematical reasoning is good only for an infinity that has been defined as being infinity larger or infinity small. Then it can be said that mean that it has infinity over infinity large equals 1, or else infinity small over infinity 1 small equals 1 again. And we can eliminate the symbol and the concept of the infinity, that is, and speak only of the quantitative divided by itself, large or small, provided it remains within the limits or unintelligible number. All of this is of no help whatsoever. It only misguides us in finding answers for an intellect that tells us unequivocally there must exist unity. Truly one, because it is not is composed of parts, an indivisible unity that in all truth is original unity. Intellect, that is, intellect consciousness of the divine soul, asserts that this must be, for there must be a origin of all that exists, of all that has been born and has become, for all that has endured birth and death is but transition and is not absolute. Our intelligence answers that this may very well be so, but that we are unable to comprehend it. And it is true, we cannot comprehend it. Here lies the division that separates men more radically than any abyss. Some place themselves on the side of intelligence and say, we cannot understand, so let's leave this be. These are legion. They respond to a natural inertia, and they shall live until the day of the great judgment, which comes for each of us through the torments of suffering. This judgment will say to consciousness, so there was something else. Question. And I lived so much, struggled so much, suffered so much, instead of contemplating the internal voice within me, which shouted, I affirm, and if you do not understand, then believe. End quote. The others prepare, perhaps by the past they have lived, admit without understanding, and they make the effort to follow intellect against all intelligence. I am attempting to express the real drama being played in every individual who searches. It is not to be simplified into uh, a factual, a factual attitude of let's give up and believe, or to believe in this fashion in God in the unknowable unity leads nowhere. And this God remains a papa with a flowing white beard, the latter probably symbolic of the venerable old age people are willing to bestow on a benevolent God in their own image. If we reject the assumptions of intelligence and begin to heed intellect affirmation of an absolute indivisible unity, that is the origin of everything, and hence all numbers, we can examine where such a point of view might lead us. First, how can this unity exist? Something in us must allow us, if not to reach this inconceivable point, at least to circumscribe it. Consciousness is an amazing phenomenon. Before entering into the study of consciousness proper, let us first examine that is sensible and cerebral consciousness. The word consciousness means, first of all, a knowing with, or a knowing together. Two opposing elements are needed in order for consciousness to come about. I'll say that again. Two opposing elements are needed in order for consciousness to come about. We are conscious of a magnitude in relation to another magnitude, something large in comparison with something smaller. Something exists because we can compare it with a fraction of that thing. And finally, we can say such a thing exists because we can compare it with the moment when it did not exist. In a trivial manner, one could say those of our teeth which don't hurt don't exist. They start existing for us when they hurt, because then we are conscious of their existence. In the final analysis, the extreme comparison always wins out. We are conscious of the existence of a thing, that is ourselves or a part of our body, a object, etc., only through the faculty of comparison with the non-existence of that thing. We say that this table exists because it can also not exist. And if it were impossible for such a thing not to exist, we would never be conscious of its existence. If there never were a night or a shadow, we would never be conscious of day and of night. This is why the whole idea of duality is here. This is my words of saying here, because people just want to refuse to see that this is a duality world, folks. It's very simple. You have night and day, two different opposites. That's duality. That's as simple as it can be. You have right and wrong, So you have two concepts here, which means you have two pillars. So you have duality again. If we cannot compare, we simply do not have consciousness. Pretty strong statement, isn't it? And it's pretty bold and it's true. There may exist in the world a mass of phenomena of which we are unaware, having no point of comparison by which to know them. A law commands the process of becoming conscious of something. Place yourself in the situation where the unknown thing, that is, whose existence is omitted a priority, is done away with. Thus, through a negation that science calls elimination, a progression leads us to affirmation. This law is to be noted. It is a prime starting point for the approach to the study of nature. Our consciousness exists only through comparison for the created being. Affirmation proceeds only from negation. Hence, everything proceeds from a schism or division into something that affirms its relation to something that denies. Coming from the creative world, however, we can proceed only through negation. Thus, from the beginning, we situate ourselves in one world in relation to another, whose existence our intellect affirms, the world in which, contrary to ours, everything proceeds by pure and simple affirmation. The world of number is the eternal world, which is invariable and where only affirmation exists. Our world in the image of the other is variable. It is a constant negation unto affirmation, the consequence of duality, of a schism, of a division that is the cause of existence and the cause of its fall, as the scriptures say. Our intellect asserts absolute unity incomprehensibly to the intelligence, and this affirmation is beyond us, is but a word, a sensation of truth, and we can become obscurely aware of it only by opposing to this affirmation of unity the possibility of its absence, of its non-being. Neither is being, which is absolute unity, nor is it, nor its true absence seems evident to us, but we can comprehend pure and simple negation by no longer attempting to understand. Thus, there is, from the beginning, a duality for us in the affirmation of the intellect. We immediately oppose to absolute unity a duality that comprises a yes and a no, something indivisible that, as our reason mysteriously tells us, proceeds from a schism, from a division. We may search in 1,000 ways, and we must finally conclude that there is a necessity, a true, indivisible, and hence incomprehensible unity. Of this unity is born the first comprehensible notion through division. Thus, at the origin of all creation, there is a unity that incomprehensibly must include within it a chaos of all but possibilities, and its first manifestation will be through division. At the origin of all concepts, there is one and two beings, three principles where one explains the other incomprehensibly in itself. Here then, by abstraction, we have entered the very heart of metaphysics. And we now have in hand the meaning and the keys of number. Here is the divine Trinity that is infallible, found at the origins of all things, all arguments and reasoning, the Trinity that supports everything, the foundation on which the world is built, as everything stems from it. The original unity contains all possibilities of being, and of non-being. Consequently, it is of androgynous nature. Duality contains the schism, the division. It emanates from unity and at the same time receives the possibility of unity. It is essentially feminine, as we shall see later on. Therefore, Trinity, formed of one and of two, becomes an image of absolutely unity. But while being a new creature unity, it ceases to be absolute, yet participates of the absolute as creative unity. Do you care to translate this as Father, Spirit, and Son, or Osiris, Iris, and Horus, or Brahman, Shiva, and Vishnu? And I'm going to show you a piece of artwork here. Book. So this is figure 16. None is the primordial waters. Okay, scripture speaks of this in Genesis 1. From which Tom, T-U-M, will be born, the one and only in the none, in you, effect of the first schism. Ton likewise means the totality of existence and negation, non-being. At the top of the image, the world reversed the Dwa, D-W-A-T, encircled by Osiris. The upper part of the image must be viewed upside down. So here is what I'm trying to show you here. I'll try to get this up here. Let me see if I can make this a little easier to see. You may, but if you are wise and wish not to be led astray, you will say 1, 2, which are 3. This has been represented by initiates for those who need images so that they may rally around a tradition and be bound by what is called religion. He just gave the definition of religion being simply being bound. In the path of wisdom, the cloaks of images forms must be shed and purity sought. These principles must be contemplated without translation because it becomes increasingly difficult to remain pure and not to fall back into the concrete image, into the illusion of forms. Thus we have reached the gate of the world of numbers, and we see how each step ahead uncovers the world where all faculties are needed to pass from one number to the other. And that is the conclusion of chapter 5 tonight. On the particular book by Rene Schwaller called Elementary Concepts of Number as Key to Knowledge. So we're through that part, and we'll start with chapter 6. Probably not tonight, maybe tomorrow night, and we'll deal with that particular chapter. Again, thank you for being here, and I appreciate your attendance and hope that this makes some sense, because reality, we're being shown in many ways. If there was nothing but all right in this world, we would not appreciate what is right or true. There must be falsehood in order for you to see truth. It's the same way with the appreciation of night and day. If it was day all the time, we would not know what night is. So we're shown what night is. Same thing with day. Again, it's to give you an idea of the opposites in order for you to see the beauty and the goodness also. So thank you for being here, and take care and have a good evening.